entry strategy, we want to look at Luke chapter 10, the house of peace, looking for a person of peace when Jesus sent out the 72. So we'll be looking at Luke chapter 10 and verses 1 through 20. In Luke chapter 1, we're seeing that Jesus sent out the 72 by his authority, and we're seeing that Jesus sent out 2 by 2. So these are the principles we're seeing. They're sent in Jesus' authority, and they're sent 2 by 2. When you look at Luke chapter 10, verse 2, what do you see there? He told them, ask the Lord of the harvest, send out the workers. Pray before you go. In chapter 10, verse 3, what do you see there? The Lord said, go, and he's sending us out like lambs amongst wolves. There's going to be a lot of difficulties in the field. What about Luke chapter 10, verse 4? Take nothing with you, greet no one along the way. Here's the principle: have complete dependence upon God. It's not going to depend on our resources. It's going to depend on God. And what do you see in verses 5 and 6? We're sharing the gospel of peace, and if that person receives the gospel, they're a person of peace. That's a house of peace. And so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that one when we share the gospel, that house of peace. They're receiving the gospel. In Luke 10, chapter 9, we're preaching the kingdom of God has come to you. We're preaching the gospel of peace. We're preaching the kingdom of God. There's healing and there's spiritual warfare and casting out of demons. In Luke chapter 10, verses 7 and 8, what do we do when we find that house of peace? When we find the person of peace that's receiving the gospel of peace, we stay there, we fellowship, we equip the disciples, we establish the house church. And that's a key in the house of peace strategy. What do we see in Luke chapter 10 and verse 10 through 12? If there isn't anybody that is receiving the gospel, there's no house of peace, there's no man of peace, shake the dust off your feet. That means it's time to move on to the next village. And again, start the process of looking for the man of peace. And what do we see in Luke chapter 10, verses 17 through 20? What happens when these disciples return? They return with joy, and they see that the authority that Jesus has given them is a spiritual authority. And so the disciples can do everything that their disciplers can do. And we're looking for that 2 Timothy 2:2 principle that others are finding the house of peace and man of peace and sending out. And so this becomes our entry strategy to get in as many houses as possible and find those who are receptive to the message of Jesus Christ. So we see that Luke chapter 10 is the strategy that Jesus used with his 12 disciples and the 72, sending them out 2 by 2 into the houses, finding the man of peace and the house of peace. We see the same strategy again in Acts chapter 13 through 21, when the early church was going from place to place and preaching the gospel and finding those who are receptive. And so that's why Luke chapter 10 is an entry strategy.